Okay, welcome back. This is a live episode of Under the Crosshairs series on Frederick, Harlan Coe, Part 5, Architect of Madness, covering Coe's mother, Ruth Coe, and her relationship with her son. I'm your host, Cheryl, and once again, presenting today is researcher Kim, presenting your research on Coe. I would like to remind you to like and subscribe and to continue to get updates on the channel. If you have questions for Kim and I during the live presentation, please put them in the chat box. We will be taking scheduled breaks to discuss some of the presentation and take some of your questions. I also want to remind you that we have another live of our Chronicle series tomorrow, where we are going to be discussing whether the crimes are planned or whether they are random. Before we get started, I would like to read our Zodiac Theory disclaimer. Zodiac Theory Discord server and its associated YouTube channel is a place for research and discussion concerning the Zodiac Killer. We endeavor to discover the historical and criminological background of the events associated with those crimes. The opinions of individual members of the server or any guests on the YouTube channel are their own opinions. These opinions do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the server or its administrators and members. Publication in any way does not constitute an endorsement of those opinions by anyone other than the speaker. We offer this information to encourage conversation and research that may one day bring justice for the victims of these horrific crimes. So welcome, Kim.
Thanks, Cheryl. It's good to be doing presentation number 5 today with you. Today, we are focusing on the main source of stress in Frederick Harlan Coe's life, which was undoubtedly his mother, Ruth Coe. We're going to touch on Ruth Coe's social history, her psychological history, as far as what we know publicly, her engagement in her son's life, and her own legal troubles after her son was arrested and convicted. It's worth spending the time needed to understand elements of the environment that Frederick Coe grew up in when much of his psychosocial foundation was formed. This can give us some insights, hopefully, into what could have been churning inside of Fred Coe that drove him to commit heinous acts of harm against innocent people. This presentation won't add much to the specific body of evidence that would implicate him as a Zodiac killer, but it could help us in understanding the serious nature of the dysfunction that may have laid the foundation for murder. I have here a short news clip. It aired recently in advance of Frederick Coe's pending hearing and subsequent release from McNeil Island this past month, October 1st. In this video, you will hear some recent reminiscing on Ruth Coe by Bevan Maxey. He is the son of well-known Spokane attorney Carl Maxey, who represented Frederick Coe at his sentencing, and also his mother after she got herself into her own legal troubles.
All right, we've got continuing coverage right now of the potential release of Kevin Coe, commonly known as Spokane's South Hill rapist. A pioneering civil rights leader in Spokane, Carl Maxey was the public defender who represented Coe during his trial. Maxey also represented Coe's mother, Ruth Coe, who was accused of hiring a hitman against the judge and the prosecutor in Kevin Coe's trial. I just spoke with Bevan Maxey, Carl Maxey's son, who practices law in Spokane, a bit about the case. He gave me some insight into the type of person Ruth Coe was.
But Miss Coe, she loved her son very, very much. She was very, very emotional about it. Obviously, she went beyond, what was reasonable and the things that she was engaged in that got her charged with crimes. But on a personal level, someone meeting her, very sweet lady, very considerate, very kind and giving to other people. But due to the fact that, something involved her son, I think it pulled her over the precipice emotionally.
All right.
All right, so I just need to get the next slide here. So that was a generous description of Ruth Coe by attorney Bevan Maxey, but is it an accurate one? It's odd to think that a woman who is that sweet and kind and giving could also happen to be the woman who raised one of the most successful and violent rapists in the history of the state of Washington. In previous presentations, I did provide some detail on Ruth Coe, and you might be thinking there's a discrepancy between what I've passed on so far and the description that Mr. Maxey has provided here. And you would be right. Today's presentation will provide a lot more perspectives on Mrs. Coe, and most of this presentation today will be a series of short excerpts extracted from various sources, many from Jack Olson's book, Son, and others from statements by those who knew the Coe family. I'll leave it to you to decide if these paint a more likely picture of what we would expect to find in the mother of violent serial rapist Frederick Coe, or perhaps even someone who could grow up to become a serial murderer. Mamie Ruth Enfield was born in Spokane, Washington on June 20th of 1920 to parents Fred L. Enfield and wife Edna Turnley Enfield. She joined one sibling, brother Edmund Lee Enfield, who was 10 years old at the time. Just prior to her birth, the family relocated from West 1524 York Avenue to West 1828 6th Avenue in Spokane, Washington. And their new location was on the South Hill, which is considered an upscale region in Spokane. Ruth's father, Fred L. Enfield, and his wife Edna owned and operated the Farmer's Dry Goods Store at West 1211 First Avenue in Spokane, and members of Ruth's mother's family were also merchants in Spokane. Their move from the northern part of the city to a home on the South Hill of Spokane was a sign of rising socioeconomic status. The dry goods business must have been going well for them. Further evidence of this is their access to other luxuries of the time, such as a Ford touring car, in which they set a record time for scaling Mount Spokane by automobile. So, something to think about here is the social position of Ruth's family when she was growing up. Kind of a material background with her family, being merchants, owning and operating stores. There were also grocers in her family, operating grocery stores in the Spokane area while she was growing up and living there as an adult. So, and I think that connects in some way to her value system as an adult. She was very materialistic.
And a question that I had for you here, Kim, was this was a not just one grocery store. We're talking about several dry goods stores.
Well, her immediate parents had one dry goods store, but then other relatives owned a Turnley grocery stores in Spokane.
Okay.
There's multiple news articles about violations of fruit laws and that sort of thing, how produce was displayed, various clues to the background.
Okay. Okay. So we really are talking about like a middle class upbringing. And we're not talking about extremely wealthy, but in her eyes, compared, because we have to also keep in mind that this was during the Depression, right? So, right. She's going to be comparing herself from, as a child, you're comparing yourself to those who are around you. So during the Depression, she would have been around 10 by that time. So really, like the haves and have-nots during that point in time was something that definitely had an impact on a lot of children growing up during that time, right?
That's right. And we see other evidence of this in adulthood with her, with references to relatives who lived in Georgia and talking about how they knew the Coca-Cola folks. So that would have been considered high status at the time.
Okay. But ultimately, that would be in, from a child's perspective, compared to those around her, she felt a little bit more emboldened. Okay.
Yes, her family certainly probably had more resources than most at the time.
I'd like to welcome, we have to some of the people we have here in the chat. We have Sammy Whammy Papa. Hi, how are you? And Sarah Uthism. I believe that's how you pronounce that. Looks like they have subscribed, so thank you. We're glad to have you and everybody else here. Okay, I'll let you continue. Thank you.
It is interesting to note in Olson's novel that Ruth's mother, Edna Turnley Enfield, was praised by other family members as a saint. Next to this description of her husband, Fred L. Enfield, is referred to as a dry goods merchant. There is no mention as to how Edna Enfield came by her sainthood. Both Mr. and Mrs. Enfield were involved with the Masons in Spokane. with Mr. Enfield being a part of Masonic Lodge 74 and volunteering with the Order of Demolay, the Masonic youth organization that grandson Frederick would briefly join in his youth. Mrs. Enfield was a part of Alcyone Chapter 97 OES, Order of the Eastern Star, and the White Shrine of Jerusalem, both of these having connections to the esoteric Masonic fraternity and providing options for women to be affiliated with the Masons. I think the topic of the Masons has always been one that's popped up in the Zodiac community because of the potential connection to ciphered messages and their decoder rings.
Yeah, that's and one thing that I did want to mention is that I actually have experience with the Masons. I'm not a Mason myself, obviously, but my grandfather was a Mason, and my mother was a member of the Eastern Star. And what surprised me is when people talk about that is the overemphasis that they make on Masons using ciphers and things like that. What I've actually kind of see in my experience is that a lot of there's a lot more of use of ciphers in other esoteric schools like the Order of the Golden Dawn and the Rosicrucians rather than the Masons. I think the Masons come up in that simply because they're a lot more, I think in the United States anyway, I'm not sure about other places in the world, but in the United States, the Masons really early on you see in the beginnings of the country. In Washington, D.C., as far as George Washington and a lot of our other founding fathers were Masons. And in fact, you see a lot of Masonic symbolism in our capital, in the capital of the country. So I think that's probably why that they refer to that. And simply because, a lot of people don't have a lot of experience with esoteric schools.
Yeah,
and one that kind of comes up like that.
probably even more so, very true today. I think the Masons don't have the prominence that they once, I think, had in society. But it is interesting with regards to secret messaging and whatnot. I think most adults would find that kind of juvenile. But when he was briefly in Demolay, and I believe I mentioned this in a previous presentation, he did try to hold it over his friends that he could receive encoded messages. He thought that he was always looking for an edge to elevate himself. So, and to me, if there is one thing that connects there to the Zodiac, it's that use of something to elevate oneself. So thinking that, hey, I can hold this over my friends' heads, and I'm better than you. I've got something you don't have. And that is Zodiac. We don't really know if Zodiac himself was interested specifically, if that was a hobby of his. But we do know he exploited them to kind of hold it over the public and induce fear and kind of gain control over the narrative. So, and that is something that Coe did. So I think that connects. Whether or not, like I said, the Zodiac really cared about codes after that,
Right.
you don't have any evidence. So.
Yeah, and I think sometimes really the whole idea of the Masons and a lot of those the real goal of a lot of those esoteric groups is through ritual, the building of yourself and your community and the world around you that you live in, that you really are creating that environment in the community that you live in. And I think a lot of times, at least what I've seen, is sometimes people rather see it more as a way, like you were saying, to hold it over other people. It really isn't. If you're doing that, you're really not learning the real lesson of the mysteries. So
Yes, yeah, that makes sense. And some mystery is about tradition and passing on, and certainly that was the goal. And building fraternity, that was a big part of the Masons. I think the brotherhood and the coming together, collective,
right.
the group at large. So So it's an interesting topic, but we can move on here. The earliest news reports show Mamie Ruth Enfield enjoyed a privileged childhood surrounded by relatives. Her activities included sewing circles, parties, weeks spent at a family member's summer home in Liberty Lake, Washington. In Jack Olson's book, one source recalled the following about her. Ruth was a beautiful child, and she got prettier with time. She had charm and personality, knew it too. She was one of those women who form up pretty early. By the 8th grade, she was attracting the prepubescent boys. I guess the words that described her best were luscious and sensuous. But she was never promiscuous, never cheap. A former classmate of hers said, Mamie Ruth Enfield was interested in boys, you bet. She liked their attention, but she was never in the top level of popularity in our class. She was flamboyant, given to overstatement and inappropriate response. If you ran into her downtown, she would act excited at seeing you, effusive, I would call it. I remember what she wrote in my 1938 annual. Here's wishing the best to a perfect girl. Well, I wasn't a perfect girl, but that was just the way Ruth put things. A holiday school performance in her primary school days featured an 8-year-old Ruth Enfield reciting a special story, perhaps an early indicator that she enjoyed stage performances. She began modeling at the age of 12, an interest that she would carry into her adult life. In school, she was also a member of the Irving Harmony Girls Glee Club, serving as the vice president in 1933. Ruth Enfield graduated from Lewis and Clark High School in 1938 and appeared on the honorable roll that same year. In the 1938 Tiger, the annual Lewis and Clark High School yearbook, Ruth Enfield had a short story published entitled Sitting for a Picture, a melodramatic tale about just that, sitting for a picture. In the same yearbook, a class prophecy was published in story form that included the entire graduating class woven into a creative storyline. The story is described as a true episode in the life of the great detective Roger Frederick Safford, called by some Relentless Raj. In this story, Mamie Ruth appears as one of 2 women newspaper reporters who climb through a window, interrupting an interview between Relentless Raj and people at the scene. Another creative twist in the story has a couple of classmates appearing in Gone with the Wind, the movie that would be released the next year based on Ruth's favorite novel. In a prior presentation, I covered Ruth's absolute obsession with this novel, her fake Southern accent, and the false stories she told others of growing up in the South. This seems to have been a coping mechanism for her, a way of escape from the reality of her existence. From her 1938 year senior yearbook photo, it can be seen that Ruth was involved in a couple of clubs, including one involving news distribution at her school. It appears that, like her husband in the future, Gordon Coe, she also had an early interest in newspapers. She had plans to study social science at Whitman College in Spokane. As she does not appear in the 1939 edition of the Wailatpu, the Whitman College annual yearbook, we can assume something happened that derailed her plans. Mamie Ruth Enfield married for the first time in fall of 1939. A marriage license dated 10/23/39, filed in Kootenai County for Ruth Enfield and Steve Wilson, was witnessed and signed by 1 police chief and 2 justices of the peace. Their divorce was granted in September of 1940, shortly before what would have been their first anniversary. Ruth's next marriage was to Clyde Brown, just 9 months later in July 1941. This marriage was witnessed by her parents, and the ceremony was performed at Central Christian Church in Spokane, with the Reverend H. Van Winkle officiating. Mr. and Mrs. Brown's divorce was finalized in November of 1944 after Ruth Brown testified that her husband preferred freedom to the responsibilities of marriage. On April 27, 1946, Ruth married Gordon Coe in a ceremony at Corbin Park Methodist Church with only members of the immediate family present. For Ruth, this was her 3rd marriage. For Gordon Coe, his 2nd. They were married for almost 50 years until Ruth Coe's death in March of 1996. For richer or poorer, for better or worse, there was a lot of the latter in the marriage of Gordon and Ruth Coe. It is also interesting to note that before her marriage to Gordon Coe, Ruth was entertaining thoughts of relocating to California. A quote from Jack Olson's novel. Other information turned up, not all of it verifiable. Just before meeting Gordon in late 1945, Ruth had planned to leave Spokane for California. She'd never spoken highly of her native city and had felt rejected by its high society. Early in 1946, she'd married reporter Gordon Coe, just home from the war. Unquote. Ruth and Gordon Coe had 2 children, their first being Frederick Harlan, born on February 2nd, 1947, and 8 years later, daughter Kathleen Sue Ellen arrived in June of 1955. The birth of daughter Kathleen resulted in Fred being relocated to the attic, where Ruth put glitter on the ceiling to resemble stars. A bedroom space Fred would later share with his maternal grandfather, Fred Enfield. Quote, "The neighborhood atop the South Hill where the couple raised their children was highly social, but word was that the Coes received few invitations. Mrs. Coe had quickly established a reputation for being different. All the years that I knew her," said a childhood friend of daughter Kathleen, "Ruth remained consistently eccentric. You'd see her driving down the street in the family car, and if Fred wasn't sitting next to her, a big collie was. When I was in high school, I walked into a big department store, and I saw this collie coming down the row, scented and coughed, a bow around its neck. I started to ask myself, who the hell would—" "Oh," I said, "hello, Mrs. Coe." Another quote from Jack Knott Olson's book. It seems Ruth Coe kept an emotional support animal before emotional support animals were even a thing. So what's interesting here is the dynamics in the family and Ruth's early interest in California, thinking about leaving Spokane for California. As I said right before, she ended up pairing up with Gordon Coe and marrying him. And he would have been somebody higher on the pecking order, the social pecking order in Spokane at the time, being a part of the newspapers. An educated college man back from the war.
Yeah, and also it seems like a very, very isolated existence. It sounds like they didn't have very many social invitations.
No, they didn't. And Ruth would later talk about her boredom in her marriage to Gordon.
Yeah, and it would be interesting to kind of see what Gordon's view of the marriage was. Really, this was a time period when you really did not see people have, she was what, 26, and she was twice divorced, and
Yes.
he was also divorced. And middle class America, you really did not see people having that many, not that many marriages and especially divorces.
Mhm.
So it would be kind of interesting whether they saw this as like their last chance, and whether they really loved one another or did they just see one another as the last option.
That's an interesting comment. It is interesting because, and I believe I may have brought this up in a prior presentation, but Ruth at some point had told her son that she considered aborting him, but when she became pregnant. And there's a reference in Jack Olson's book that she had done that in previous marriages, aborted children. And she told her son that she decided not to do that because she really did love Gordon, she said. So I think telling your child that you kept him kind of, on a whim almost, I thought about aborting you, but then I decided not to because I really did love your dad.
Not that she loved him.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be a tough message to swallow from your mother, I think.
Yeah.
And I think she was emotionally codependent on her son. This talk about her driving around town regularly with him, seated next to her. I think there was some kind of definitely emotional dependency, and we'll get to that more in this presentation today.
Yeah, I mean, especially he at eight he was displaced by his sister, and that is a time of development that you really are, is characterized by industry versus inferiority, and not only that, but his place in the family. All of a sudden he was put in the place where he was equivalent to a colleague.
Yeah.
Like the friend said, if Fred wasn't next to her in the the collie was. So, in a way, he really was an emotional support pet for her.
Yes.
So you really kind of see, you all of a sudden, your place in the family is equivalent to the family dog.
Yes. Yes. Very much interchangeable with the dog, for
Mhm.
sure. My own father was born pretty close in time to Frederick Coe, and it's interesting. He too was older when his one sibling came along. It was a younger brother. I think he was about 10 when his brother was born, and he was not happy about it. He said his brother was an intruder. He had mom and dad to himself for all those years, and then this thing shows up. So I just wonder, with the proximity in time and the fact that they're from the same generation, they're both baby boomers, and they both had a similar experience with family structure in that regard. And just kind of looking at the perspective that possibly Fred felt very much the same way.
Yeah. Well, and also, like, when you look at it in a Freudian way, normally, Freud talks about, penis envy. Well, normally, uh, the men are in power earlier in the 20th century, and this is a situation where really the roles have been kind of reversed in that family, where the woman really is seen as a person who has the power in the family.
Yes, very much.
So it kind of is really interesting to kind of look at this, where it's kind of a reverse Freudian view of the penis envy, where it's more of a vagina envy. And it explains his anger towards women, because pretty much, the women are the ones who have the power. And, he was displaced by his sister, and to really get that kind of attention that he craves, he probably is viewing, women as the the ones in power, which I think that, you in his writings, you had that, where, he was, in a lot of his writings, it really kind of showed that is how he viewed women.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yeah,
it explains the anger.
definitely. Definitely. And even the poem he wrote to the papers, Mother Washington, it's this female matriarchy sort of framework that he is used to very
Yeah.
much. All right. So after her arrest, Ruth Coe became very involved in the construction of alibis for her son in an attempt to prove that he could not have committed a single one of the rapes he was charged with. She was tireless in her defense of her son. It's hard to understand her cheerful demeanor in this photo taken during a bail hearing in between his two trials. Is she putting on a good face? Is she trying to project a feeling of optimism? Either way, she has the appearance of someone who's really enjoying the day.
Yeah, she definitely, and in her mind, she probably was. Sometimes, you've heard the saying that even bad publicity is good publicity. On that day, all eyes were on her.
Yes. And that really came out of Fred too in his during his trial. He was conducting interviews with the news and the media. I think we'll touch on that a little bit here today too. On the stand, both Ruth and her son claimed they were amateur sleuths trying to locate clues on the South Hill rapist, which they said explained why Frederick Coe had been observed in rape hot zones during the investigation. Ruth Coe, amateur sleuth. It's really enough to make one want to abdicate the throne. In support of her son, Ruth would go so far as to attempt to intimidate others into also testifying to falsehoods on Frederick's behalf. She even fabricated stories about receiving phone calls from the quote-unquote real rapist, theatrical mocking communications supposedly coming from someone insinuating her son had been falsely accused and convicted, and the caller himself was free. And there were lots of E's on that. So very, very interesting here. And also just the wording here, when he refers to the fact that he and his mother were collecting clues. There was a tip line sent up through the newspaper, and his father, Gordon Coe, the calls that came in through the tip line were directed to his office at the Spokane Chronicle. So it's kind of interesting when you look at the newspaper ads for the tip line, is they were looking for tips and information. But Fred always says they were looking for clues. So I just find that wording sort of interesting here in the context of things. So just the word choice and the match with the zodiac and his leaving of fake clues. So I have next a short video, and this is Ruth and her defending of her son.
Ruth Coe was also outspoken about her son's innocence.
They tell us that the Southville rapist is caught. Throw away your mace, throw away your guns. You safe girls. Ha! My son didn't do it.
Not long after Frederick Coe's conviction, a source reached out to the Spokane Police Department to report on statements made by Ruth Coe that indicated she was looking for a hitman. After looking into this tip, the police set up an entrapment scheme to test whether Ruth Coe was serious about her intentions. In a phone call to the Coe household, Ruth told an undercover officer that she wanted Judge George Shields and prosecutor Donald Brockett taken out, dead. She would later indicate her preference that Donald Brockett be left as an addle-pated vegetable wearing diapers for the rest of his life. The exchanges between the undercover officer and Ruth Coe were recorded, and they subsequently arrested her. She responded to the officer saying, I thought so, that's right, I really did think so. The undercover hitman said, I'm sorry it had to be this way, and Ruth replied saying, I'm not. During trial, Ruth Coe's attorney attempted a mental health defense strategy, and Ruth Coe was painted as a grieving mother who had battled years of mental illness, which included a diagnosis of manic depression by 1973. Detail on her heavy medication use came out during trial. Her medications included lithium, a benzodiazepine, steroids for her allergies, an antihistamine, and a thyroid medication. Ruth Coe reportedly became hysterical and suicidal during her trial when she learned that the secret recording of her exchange with the undercover officer was aired on the radio in defiance of a court order. She spent the weekend in a hospital psychiatric ward, but recovered in time to appear in court on Monday, composed and with a calm demeanor. In sentencing her, the judge commented that her case read like a Greek tragedy, and he factored in her emotional vulnerability, her long-standing mental illness, her 61 years of non-criminal, non-violent conduct, and a series of misfortunes that afflicted her prior to her crime. In short, she really didn't get what she deserved. Though she failed to win leniency on behalf of her son through all of her defensive maneuvers, on her own behalf, she managed to garner enough sympathy for herself in the eyes of the court to receive an inordinate level of mercy. This, in spite of the fact the judge believed she was capable of intent and had indeed intended to harm the judge and prosecutor.
And this is where I was kind of wondering, like, did she use lithium or any of those other drugs during her pregnancy with Frederick?
I don't have any psych history on her prior really to the early 1970s. That's when it first starts appearing in Jack Olson's book. And then everything I've read on her, and I have some police files because of the legal troubles here, is I don't see anything going back any further than that. But somebody, she was not young for the times when she had her first child, more mid to late 20s. And so it's possible that she was medicated, prior to the 70s for sure. It's very possible. Somebody, who's in their 50s is not likely to be getting a new diagnosis of manic depressive disorder, that sort of thing. Usually that comes at a younger age. So it's very possible.
Okay. And I'd like to remind everybody who's watching, if you do have any questions, make sure to put it in the chat, and we'd love to have you join the discussion.
So we'll move on to other perspectives on Ruth Coe. From reports on Ruth's legal proceedings, we have seen the perspective of the judge who heard and ruled on her case. This is written about more extensively in Olson's book and various news reports and can be further studied in these sources. But what about others, people who had been closer to her personally, friends and classmates, her son's friends and romantic partners, and other people who knew her in Spokane, where she resided her entire life up until her son's arrest and conviction? Some who knew her described Ruth Coe as eccentric, hard to talk to, unless you mentioned her kids. Others said similar things, that Ruth liked to talk about children and animals. But still others have darker descriptions of her, that she was full of spite, and her son was an extension of that spite. There are many anecdotes from which we can glean some perspective on Ruth Coe. I'm going to share several of these, and hopefully they will help you to build a perspective on her. From the Coe family newspaper boy. I remember being the Coe's morning newspaper delivery boy. I had to collect money each week to pay my route bill and myself. I went to collect at their house. Fred answered the door. This was about 1964. Fred informed me that his mother said I was the worst paper boy they had ever had, and that his mom was a superwoman who liked everyone except for me. He dwelled on this subject for a minute or so. My being about 4 years younger than Fred could not really defend myself or make immediate retribution. I did actually bang their paper off their aluminum screen door at 5 a.m. for a few weeks. I still laugh about that. God, what a monster he is. You might think this story reflects more about Fred Coe than his mother, but consider for a moment that it was Ruth Coe's obligation to pay her newspaper bill. As the wife of the city editor of the Spokane Chronicle, it seems in particularly poor taste to send your son to the door to intimidate the paper boy when it's time to pay your bill. The newspaper boy who served the Coe family passed away this past month, October 2025. Investigating Frederick Coe is going to be increasingly difficult moving forward, as many who knew the Coe family have died just in the time since I've begun looking into him. It's a bit ironic that the Coe family newspaper boy also last resided in Federal Way, Washington, and passed away within days of Frederick Coe being sent to Federal Way after his release from McNeil Island. Another anecdote from the bank teller at the Coe's family bank. Through a reliable source, I have heard that when Ruth Coe entered the bank where the Coe family kept their accounts for the purpose of making a withdrawal, no one wanted to wait on her. This is because if they did not produce her cash at an acceptable rate of speed, she would become very irate. It is an important detail that at some point in time, her husband had to put controls in place to limit her access to funds in order to protect the family's financial resources from her wild spending habits. And she really did spend a lot of money. She really liked going on a good spending spree. She would travel to New York City with her husband as part of his newspaper duties, serving on committees. He served on various Associated Press committees over the years, and they would travel there, and she'd go on spending sprees in New York City. She had a lot of clothes and jewelry.
Yeah,
So
it reflects how she appears. It's not any kind of depth, but yet, you know, the thing is that at the same time, like the one where you're talking about the newspaper boy, when your husband is the editor of the newspaper, and then you're not wanting to pay your newspaper bill. It's kind of reflect. You would think that would be, she would see that as reflecting on her personally, but it doesn't seem like that. As far as who she was, it doesn't seem like she was impacted by that very much. And it's kind of interesting, like if you grow up in a situation like that where that kind of behavior is acceptable and you see that as the thing to do, you really don't see the problem with violating boundaries, or how you look is more important than who you are.
definitely. And I think you're getting at the heart of the sorts of things that laid the foundation for his embracing of situational ethics.
Yeah.
It's okay to do what I want if I perceive I have need, or you have something that I think I don't have that I want.
Yeah.
All right. From Fred Coe's hairstylist, we have some perspective. This is excerpted from Jack Olson's book. He had long discussions with his stylist, Sherry, in Lincoln Heights, telling her exactly what he wanted done, and she always ended up granting him extra time. Sometimes Ruth accompanied him and paid his bill. Mrs. Coe's as particular about his hair as he is, the receptionist said one day. They're so sweet together, the way they hold hands and touch. We were noticing the last time they were in. If Kevin hesitated in the middle of a sentence, Mrs. Coe would fill in the word. They are that close. So he was really into his appearance. He spent a lot of time on his appearance. He had a lot of changes of hairstyle and in general appearance changes, in addition to weight loss and weight gain regularly. And Ruth Coe really insisted on perfection out of her son, and she would pay attention to his hair too.
Yeah, that's interesting that the hairstyle is kind of referred to it, almost in an endearing way, like they're that close. But for a grown man to be having his mother attend him to get his hair done, it's almost like there's no boundary. It's almost like he was not allowed a boundary between himself and his mother.
Yes, I think that's a good way of viewing it. Definitely, there was a lack of boundaries between them and their relationship. And some people maybe thought it was sweet, such as this perspective, but other people saw through it.
Yeah.
So Fred's friend in his childhood, this is another anecdote, also from Jack Olson's book. Every few months, he went out of his way to impress her by doing a rank imitation of the Today on the Leave It to Beaver show. Gee, Mrs. Coe, he would say, that's a beautiful ring you're wearing. Oh, thank you, Jay, darling, she would respond and ask her if he would like to see her jewelry collection. He doesn't want to see your old jewelry, Fred would say. Minutes later, she would return to the room, hands full of jewels. What do y'all think of this? She would say, modeling a nest of rings, 3 separate bands of red, white, and blue stones that went halfway up her finger. Fred acted bored, but Jay crowed and clucked in the best Eddie Haskell tradition. It was like playing grown-up with a real grown-up. From an interview with another of Coe's friend, John Nyberg. What did she see as her position in the Spokane community? Where did Ruth Coe see herself? Well, that's difficult to say. However, I think where she'd like to project herself was to the upper echelon. I think she felt that her husband's position was significant, and it indeed was, and she probably wanted to run in that circle if she could. I don't know about their social life, Mr. and Mrs. Coe. I don't know how much of that they accomplished, but it was clear she wore diamond rings, big ostentatious jewelry, dressed immaculately, around the house. Never saw her without her makeup and her hair done. She was an attractive woman and appeared to be an intelligent woman and would make food for us when we come over. But she was we were going to go somewhere and he'd be eating lunch and he'd say, we've got to go. And his mother would say, Coco, you've got to finish. And he would not cross her. He chose not to stand up to her and I teased him about that. I'd say, why don't you just tell your mom and explain to her that we've got to go? He would say, no, John, you don't understand. You don't tell my mother that stuff. Believe me, it's better if I just finish my lunch. Eat slow like she tells me to, and that was that. And that particular instance I'm citing was somewhat indicative of their relationship as far as I could tell. She said jump, and he said how high. And he said not to challenge her and didn't want to get her started. And so there was but again, there are a lot of people whose parents they have a kind of relationship that they do what they're told. And from Jack Olson's interview with the same individual, John Nyberg, the following passage appears in his book. For years, she kept her hooks in him. She followed him to San Francisco, to LA, to Vegas. She'd stay 6 months at a time, and he'd always act glad. I'd never known anyone whose mother had that much control over him. Sometimes she'd tear across a room at him with her nails out, and he'd always back off. 2 minutes later, she'd be cupping his face in her hands and talking baby talk. I'm telling you, that house was Ozzie and Harriet meet Streetcar Named Desire. But Fred always said his family was the only one he ever wanted. Looking back on it, he and I were close, but not as close as we pretended. He concealed his real failures and weaknesses. He had personality and wit, but he never seemed to lighten up and have fun. It wouldn't occur to him to go into an arcade or waste a few hours playing games. He never did anything just for the hell of it. Somebody convinced him that he didn't have time. So I find it interesting, Fred's comments, that his family was the only one he ever wanted, because it becomes very clear throughout his adult life that his mother was very abusive towards him, emotionally, psychologically.
It's interesting. I think children, well, all people, they learn a dance from their family, and he probably at that point knew that he would be having difficulty learning how to be in a healthy relationship, because really the unhealthy relationship that he had in his family was really the only thing that he knew how to do. Um, and also I think that he was starting to, he believed Ruth's hype about everything, that they were the best, that if he had a different family, um, they just wouldn't be as good as what they are.
Yeah, I think that you're kind of talking to the comfort level that people feel, even if it's not a healthy environment. Like
Right.
you said, it's the one they know. And it also explains why so many people coming out of environments like that tend to pair up with people from dysfunctional backgrounds as well.
Right. Yeah, the devil is better than the devil you don't.
And also be able to navigate the exchange, the relationship, the dynamic with somebody who comes from the same types of rules and background. You know how to speak, you know how to talk to them. Another quote from John Nyberg that I previously shared is interesting here, also from Jack Olson's book. She hated Spokane. He got that from her. She was spiteful about everybody there, and he was an extension of her spite. He broke out of Spokane for a while, and she broke out of it by pretending to be Southern and changing her clothes 6 times a day. She always called Spokane this little town. She taught Fred to admire places like LA and New York for the power and money. I wonder what the author, when he phrased it that way, what, an extension of her spite. What does that mean? Did she lash out through him? Did he just become bitter?
Yeah. I mean, I think that he did. I mean, like the quote that she had right before that. She would say jump, and he would say how high. So in a way, she was an extension of, whatever she felt, what she wanted, was acting.
Yeah.
And what were the repercussions for not giving Ruth what she wanted? I mean, was she physically violent, or did she just ignore? Did she just ignore him?
Well, I have a couple of quotes here that speak to that a little bit. I'll go ahead and read those. His mother never hit him, he said, except when he put his feet on the furniture or dirtied his clothes. He said he couldn't understand why Ruth was so concerned about his cleanliness and so lax about her own. She wasn't a good housekeeper, he said. God, I hate dirty houses. He wrote that his mother constantly hassled Gordon Coe about his low income. But that's just her way, Kevin said. Gordo understands. We're a very tight family. And then a separate quote. But her dog could jump all over everything, rip up the comforter on my bed, claw at her clothes, and she'd never do a goddamn thing about it. The dog took precedence.
It kind of makes you cringe.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about that, the dog or him. It was kind of one and the same. This is Miss Jenny Sandstrom here on the right. This is the woman that Coe married. He married her in 1972 and divorced her in 1976 after 3.5 years of marriage. Mother and son had always been close. He lovingly called her Bearfax or Mother Bear, and she called him Freddie Coe, Coco, Ricky, and son. She had some kind of whammy on him. There was no doubt about that. They were 26 years apart. Ruth was 58 now, although she still dressed like a young woman. But the two of them acted more like boyfriend and girlfriend, even to the point of spats and reconciliations. Jenny wished the woman would just butt out. She'd never understood the relationship between Ruth and Gordon Coe either. Fred's gray-haired father, a retired Reserve Army colonel, had been on the Chronicle for something like 40 years and married to Ruth for over 30. He was quiet and hard-working, a typical Spokaneite. Ruth hectored and badgered the poor man, wasted his money, called him a bore and a stick in the mud, and punished him with frequent threats of divorce. Sometimes she left his bed and board for months. Jenny wondered why he bothered to hang on. That summer of 1978, Jenny Coe began to entertain the slightest hope that things might work out. She'd been with her ex-husband off and on for 6 years, and she'd learned that life with Frederick Harlan Coe could be a bumpy ride, even now that they seemed headed for reconciliation. He'd helped her find an apartment, but continued living with his parents a block away on Spokane's lovely South Hill. He made conjugal visits, sometimes sneaking over for the night, but after nearly a year of this unusual arrangement, he still hadn't told his mother and father what he was doing. That's so typical of him, Jenny thought. He loves to be devious, to go from A to B by way of X and Y. But good Lord, hiding a woman from his parents at the age of 31, his own ex-wife? She was pretty sure she knew what was frightening him. Mamie Ruth Enfield Coe tyrannized her son Fred and her husband Gordon, managing editor of the Spokane Chronicle, and she tried her damnedest to tyrannize Jenny. In her former role of mother-in-law, Mrs. Coe had traveled back and forth to Las Vegas and Los Angeles, endlessly meddling in their marriage. On a drive across the Nevada desert, the short-fused woman had reached across the front seat and raked Jenny's cheek with her fingernails. The scar was permanent. She had to use cover-up when she did her face. The only apology had come from Fred. Mother Bear forgot to take her thyroid pills. That's also from Olson's book, Son.
Wow. I mean, this really sounds like it's emotionally incestuous at the very least, because he's treating his ex-wife at that point almost like another woman, the other woman.
Yes.
I mean, hiding it. I mean that.
Yes, a man that doesn't, his own mother is physically abusing his wife, and he can't even stand up to his mother under those conditions, or I should have said ex-wife in this case, but, well, they were married at the time that it had happened, so it just doesn't seem to be excusable. And unfortunately, all these people in this picture have passed on, and I just wonder what tales they might have told us if we had a chance to interview them now. I did try to interview John Nyberg while he was still alive, and I found it very interesting because I'd been told that he would talk to me by somebody who wouldn't have known, and he absolutely refused to speak with me. And I know now, I didn't know at the time, but he was in the early stages, or at least at some stage, early, maybe even mid stage of dementia. And I think that's partly why he didn't want to talk to me, is that, he probably didn't have as much control over his memories or of what he might say if he started speaking with as anyone on the topic of Fred Coe. And I do wonder what history he had with him. We know some, but we don't know all of it. More quotes from Jack Olson. Jenny could tell that Fred was still worried sick about his mother's angry reaction. He would make long detours to keep from going near his parents' condominium, and he spoke often of moving to another part of town. 1 block wasn't much of a buffer zone. But it cost money to move, and they were broke, except for Jenny's modest salary. All they could do was wait. Ruth was famous for her mood changes, a fast recycler, as her husband Gordon liked to describe her. Fred usually parked his '77 Cutlass a few blocks away so that his mother wouldn't spot it. But one evening, a few weeks after he'd moved back in with Jenny, he parked in the lot behind the building. During the night, the car was vandalized, windows broken, lights knocked out, silver gray finish dented and scratched, upholstery ripped. The insurance company paid $1,500 for repairs. 2 weeks later, the Cutlass was damaged again. This time, Coe's yellow vanity plate, Disco, drew particular attention. The insurance investigator said some of the damage looked as if it might have been inflicted by a woman's stiletto heel. Fred cautioned Jenny to be silent and told the agent he couldn't imagine who would do such a thing. The insurance company paid again. Later, Jenny asked, "What's your mother trying to prove?" "Gordo told me she's back with her shrink," Fred explained. "He said she flipped out." "Your father said that?" The words didn't sound like Gordon Coe. "What made her flip out?" Fred didn't answer. He frequently ignored difficult questions. Jenny knew it was a waste of time to probe. You've now heard several of the narratives on Ruth Coe and her relationship with her son. If what is bleeding through between the lines is giving you cause to wonder about the full nature of their relationship, you should know that your intuition is correct. It is documented from a very credible source that the relationship between Ruth Coe and her son was also a sexual one. This detail would become public knowledge during Frederick Coe's trial. In keeping true to his form, he would adamantly deny this fact, but even his friend's wife could see it in the dynamic between Ruth and her son. Concerning the vehicle incident from his wife of his best friend. She told Jay she wasn't the least surprised by what had happened to the Cutlass. She reminded Jay that they'd watched Jenny and Ruth together in the short period when mother-in-law and daughter-in-law had been friendly. Both of them overdo everything. Remember that, Jay? If they like you, they're all over you. If they hate you, they're ready to punch you out. Remember that night they were trying to out-compliment each other? Anybody could tell they hated each other. Jay said, "But why would Ruth wreck his car?" It was the jilted sweetheart routine, Jay. Do you realize how Ruth acted? Like the other woman. He said he would have to think about that. That's from Olson's book. That's a woman's point of view of Ruth and Fred's relationship. Another perspective. Wonder what kinds of insights that gives. I think women can see the other woman routine pretty quickly. The jealousy, the spitefulness.
Yeah, it's when you're a child growing up in a situation like that, it's sad that even at the very least it's very emotionally incestuous, that the closeness, that he's not able to move away from that relationship with his mother, because essentially he chose his mother over his wife or his ex-wife. It sounded like.
I apologize for that.
That's okay. But somebody really wants you. So it is kind of interesting that you're wanting that love and attention when you're a child. But in order to get that love and attention, that's why I was kind of questioning whether whether how she dealt with it was physical violence or whether it was ignoring him. Because, if you're a child and you're in an isolated situation, that intermittent affection becomes very reinforcing. So when it's there and you take it away, but it almost sounds like, even if it's just on an emotional level, it's almost like it's becoming very sexualized, as far as the nature of the relationship is almost like they're married rather than she's married to Gordon Coe, as far as like their connection. It's almost like he went from being the equivalent of the dog to being the equivalent of a spouse.
That's very true, and you see that come up in his references to his father. He refers to him as Gordo, which is really a disrespectful way of addressing your father, his name. He would just flip that out, and I just don't think he had a lot of respect for his father.
Right. Well, and essentially, he's taken over his role in a way, even if it was just the.
I am so sorry. Sorry.
Even if it was
a call. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Even if it was just even without it being sexual, essentially he's fulfilling that role of accompanying her wherever she goes, and fulfilling that emotional need that you have, with a partner, and he's not able to move on.
Right. He's not able to progress forward through normal stages in his life. And I think this is part of what kind of arrested him in his mindset. Never went past becoming a juvenile thinker. He was always very juvenile in his thinking, how he looked at the world. Kind of an emotionally arrested state. More quotes here, more perspectives. Ginny learned more. This is his girlfriend now we're talking about. Ginny learned more about the tight family on a drive to Seattle with Kevin and his mother, delivering a black collie pup to his sister Kathleen. As long as Ginny sat in back with the dog, the cross-state drive was uneventful. But when they switched around so that Ginny sat in front alongside Kevin, Mrs. Coe's tone changed. "I don't see how anybody can work for that awful James S. Black outfit," she began. Ginny started to defend her employer, but colloquy wasn't what Mrs. Coe had in mind. She went on about those jerks at Black and the unjust way they treated Son. She had special words for the man who'd fired Kevin, called him an utter incompetent who wouldn't know talent if he fell over it. Her face turned red, and Kevin tried to mollify her. Atop icy Snoqualmie Pass, he pulled off the interstate for gas. "Don't be upset, VK," he whispered. "She just gets like that." After the stop, Mrs. Coe reclaimed her position next to Kevin and spoke pleasantly for the last hour of the run to Seattle. To Ginny, it seemed that the woman had been intensely jealous and unable to control it. The lesson of the incident was clear enough. Don't sit in front with Kevin. That's Mom's spot. Once at 5 Pines, her voice took on the note of urgency as she reminded Kevin that she was depending on him for her old age. Apparently, the subject was an old one. "Have no fear, Bearfax," he said. "I've got a great plan. I'll—" "Get out and earn a lot of money," Ruth interrupted. "You're the only insurance policy I've got." Ginny thought, what about Gordon? Isn't he an insurance policy? Ruth never let up on the mortal sin of Kevin's life, his marriage to Jennifer. Seated at lunch in the quiet St. Regis, she berated him so passionately that diners put their forks down and watched. "Sucker," she hissed. He pushed this food around the plate and acted unabashed. "Fool," she went on, apparently piqued by his silence. "You're a no-good." The diatribe continued on the way home in the Cadillac. In another incident reported by his girlfriend, Kevin talked to her for 2 or 3 minutes and then turned to Ginny. "Get lost for a while," he whispered. "I've got to take her to lunch. She'll never calm down if I don't." A few nights later, the two lovers were at a Peter Sellers movie when Kevin stood up abruptly and walked 4 rows back. Ginny turned and saw Ruth. She appeared to be in a rage. When the threesome joined up, Ruth was still fuming. Again, Jack Olson's book. And more testimony from Fred's girlfriend. "His mother tried to rename me. Ruth was so much fun to be around, but most of the time it was horrible. She was bipolar. When she was speaking to her son through the glass on the day of his arrest, she looked like a lion about to chop his head off with her teeth. He was sitting there with his head bowed. Coe's attic bedroom was just a space next to the stairs, unfinished walls, and a few feet away on the opposite side was more attic where his grandfather slept. When his sister was born, he was moved from his own bedroom to the attic, as if he was yesterday's garbage, in order for the princess to become Ruth's favorite. For 5-6 years, he was her baby boy, attending in modeling and fashion shows she also participated in. She preached about her ties to the Deep South and the idea that God wrote Gone with the Wind. She was clearly pro-slavery, anti-union. She berated young women with short skirts, calling them he-she's, whores, and she hated Spokane because it was a struggle to keep friendships. I'm sure most found her erratic, a real social climber. At the time of Kevin's arrest, she had one female girlfriend who stuck by her until her own arrest. Women I knew who worked at a large department store Ruth frequently visited for clothing witnessed Ruth and Kevin shopping together, noting how they acted more like sweethearts. Ruth and Kevin used to lock themselves in Gordon's office at the Chronicle and laugh, whisper, get into his desk, while employees outside wondered what was going on. People who knew the duo had felt something was strange about their relationship. Ruth and Kevin would hop into her car with the top down and her collies in the back seat and cruise around the South Hill as if to say, "Fuck you," to a backward, unsophisticated, ignorant town that didn't like either of them. A detective told me after the second trial that a psychologist who saw Kevin for therapy said he admitted to sleeping with his mother. Her fiery religious speeches came out of nowhere. "Jesus, Lord God in heaven," she would begin in the middle of a conversation about the price of beef or the latest style in hemlines, and soon she would be expatiating on how the world sorely needed God and millions of people deserved to burn in hell, especially the ones who had affronted the Coes. The last statement was from Jack Olson. And then shortly before Coe's arrest, more from his girlfriend. And this comes from Olson's book as well. A few days later, he muttered that he had angels all over town. She wondered if his mother's entreatments about angels and devils had rubbed off on him. She asked, "Angels? What do you mean by that?" "Ah, nothing." "Do you mean rich women who give you money? Why don't they give you some now?" She just lent him $20 more for gas and a car wash. "I don't mean that kind of angel," he said. So these ramblings are a bit esoteric, a bit like maybe having slaves for the next life. What insights do you think these gain for us here about his thought processes?
Yeah, I mean, it's always difficult to when I hear that, it's difficult to understand if he meant it literally or not. Because I think that when you read this, it could be, in an esoteric way, angels. I don't mean that kind of an angel. Angels all over town. I mean, I could also read that and see that it possibly could, at that point, be victims.
Yep, I think it could tie into his rapes. I think it also could just tie into other women that he slept with around town. But he was generally pretty open in his statements about that. He didn't really try to mask that.
Right.
He saw it as conquest.
Right. So why would he need to mask it?
Right. So nobody ever really got to the bottom of that statement. Some more quotes from the same individual. After a while, she demanded to know why he always gave in to his mother and his ex-wife. "I have to," he answered. "You wouldn't understand. I have no choice." "Of course you have a choice," she cried out. "You make your own choices in life. You can't go around blaming other people all the time." "As usual, you miss the point," he said airily. "There are things that can happen that can cause a person to do things he has no control over. No control whatsoever." That's also from Jack Olson. And I wonder what he meant here about having no control whatsoever. And how does that connect to his relationship with his mother and his ex-wife? I don't know specifically what he was referring to, but in the context of this following quote from his ex-wife, these statements from Coe's girlfriend are cause for concern. Another excerpt from Jack Olson's book. From then on, Jay fielded the calls. He'd known Jenny as a tragic figure, given to bouts of self-pity, but now she seemed almost hallucinatory. "He was violent to me," she raved one night. "Did you know that? He hit me." "I can't buy that, Jenny," Jay said. "Fred's never been a violent person. I could put that bastard away for 100 years. You could put Fred away? You're goddamn right." There was a pause as though she were trying to decide whether to reveal more. And I wonder, had she only been believed? I think his wife could have told us much more about both Ruth Coe and Frederick Coe's activities, at least from 1971 when she met Fred until his arrest. Unfortunately, she passed away in 2005 at the age of 64, her death the result of complications secondary to alcoholism. Next, I'm going to share some testimony from a couple of the doctors that testified at Ruth Coe's trial. The first one will be Dr. Fred K. Byron. He was an internal medicine specialist who diagnosed Ruth with having manic depressive psychosis in 1974. So this was a bit outside of his specialty. Byron told the court when he heard the tape recording of Mrs. Coe telling arresting officers, "I thought so," you could almost sense relief in her voice. At another point in his testimony, Byron was asked if the real Ruth Coe would attempt to hire 2 murders. He replied, "I don't understand what the real Ruth Coe is at any one time because she's many different people. She suffered for years from deep depressions and flamboyant manic phases in which she embarked on wild spending sprees and laid unrealistically ambitious plans. But she hid all that from the public," Byron said. "Ruth kept a very strong mask on her face," the physician said. Although he was called by the defense, Byron's testimony did not help the defense's claim Mrs. Coe didn't intend to commit a crime. In her illness, he testified, she was aware of her intentions. But that doesn't mean, he added, that her intentions made any sense to a normal person. As a psychotic person, some of her thoughts and actions made as much sense as Hinckley shooting the president to get a date with Jodie Foster, Byron said. and from Dr. Lawless, who saw her from 1979 to 1980. One potential witness the defense chose not to call was Dr. Isaac Lawless, who treated Mrs. Coe for emotional problems from May 1979 to January 1980. Dr. Lawless instead was subpoenaed by the prosecution as a rebuttal witness. His testimony about Mrs. Coe differed sharply from that of psychiatrists and psychologists caused by the defense. Slowly, carefully, Lawless explained that Mrs. Coe puzzled him. He said he was unable to make a clear diagnosis of her condition because it didn't quite fit anything within the realm of psychiatric expertise and illness classifications. Therefore, he said, I call it bizarre. He told Bibb that when he saw her, she was not suffering from manic depressive psychosis, as defense experts said. The reason, Lawless explained, is that people with that illness never have what psychiatrists call conflicts. Mrs. Coe, however, had two conflicts, he said. The first was a refusal to accept the fact that she was growing old. She had worked as a model in the past, he noted. The second conflict was a refusal to acknowledge she had a problem with a very heavy relationship, a symbiotic relationship with her son. He said a symbiotic relationship exists where two people are closely glued together emotionally, and there's an abnormal or atypical thriving off of one another, and it's beyond the normal or healthy, or optimal, I should say, relationship that exists between two people. In a letter to one of the defense psychiatrists, Lawless said he finally reached a primary diagnosis related to personality disorder and neurotic conflict. Mrs. Coe, he remarked in the letter, obtained a great deal of gratification from her modeling and from her son. The psychiatrist said Mrs. Coe quit seeing him when he began therapeutically confronting her with her refusal to deal with these two difficulties in her life. Asked how he would have expected Mrs. Coe to react in the wake of her son's rape conviction and his sentence to life plus 75 years in prison, Lawless said, I think she would be very angered and very disappointed. He conceded on cross-examination that her ordeal following her son's arrest also could have precipitated an outbreak of psychosis, but added, I've seen a sunrise do the same thing, though. Although he has not examined her since January 1980, he said he listened to Mrs. Coe's taped conversation with the phony hitman and attempted to conduct a mental status examination based on what he heard in those tapes. Contradicting a defense psychologist, he said there was no evidence in those tapes that Mrs. Coe was suffering from psychosis or delusions. Her tone of voice, her logical conversation responses, and her train of thought in the tapes all indicate she was alert and knew what she was doing, Lawless testified. I'm not going to add in here the psychobabble from the additional defense experts. You can read about it in the May 1982 editions of the Spokane newspapers if you are interested. The judge did not buy it, and I don't find it illuminating either.
So, I mean, it really is very manipulative, isn't it? I mean, they're almost trying to paint this like she couldn't control herself, but you know, she knew what she was doing. I mean, I'm really surprised that that they were willing to give her a pass on this. I mean, whether you have mental problems or not, you still are responsible in for your own actions. And it's not that she didn't know that what her actions were wrong. And this is almost making it easy for her to continue doing this. You know, I'm really surprised that they did this, unless they were looking at the fact that, you know, they thought, well, you know, this is the first time, but this is not the first time that she's, you know, because she's struck Frederick's wife.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, really, I mean, the first time that things don't go your way, I mean, you obviously can't become homicidal. And it's not that she was not aware that what she was doing was wrong. It's surprising.
And this plot played out over weeks, from her first comments to a friend, you know, inquiring. She inquired, do you know, with somebody that she'd come into contact with, do you know anyone in the mafia? And then it proceeded from there.
She had time to think about it.
Well, she had plenty of time to, if it was a brief psychosis episode, she had plenty of time to snap out of it and come to her senses. Furthermore, she had to obtain cash. She had cash on her when they arrested her that she was putting the down payment on to the hitman. You know, I think it was $500. So there was clear intent here. But she died in Henderson, Nevada on March 26th of 1996, where she was residing with her husband, Gordon Coe, at the time. And this was after suffering from emphysema and other illnesses. A sad ending for Ruth Coe, forever immortalized as the mother of the notorious South Hill rapist. Of Ruth Coe, Jack Olson has stated, Ruth Coe was a theatrical, homicidal woman who never received the help she needed. And when Jack Olson was notified of her passing, he sighed and said, she was a pathetic creature, the very definition of a mixed-up human being. But of the dead, speak only good. There is one more perspective on Ruth Coe that I will share, and this one I find very challenging. Throughout my study of Frederick Coe and his mother, there has been an underlying sense of unease concerning the extent to which Ruth Coe was involved in her son's activities. First, because of the subtle and not so subtle hints that their relationship was a sexual one. I didn't want to believe that, but it's something most people wouldn't even want to think about, yet it's been confirmed by reliable sources. I also didn't want to believe that Ruth Coe may have had a deeper involvement in some of her son's criminal actions than's been documented. The following statement from Ruth Coe when speaking with her son's childhood friend is disconcerting at best. You're so naive, Jay. You don't know the first thing about rape. All these women running around saying they've been raped. It's not that traumatic. He remembered her saying the same words months before. What a wonder that her son's trial and conviction and the testimony of 6 pathetic victims hadn't taught her a thing about the nature of the crime he'd committed again and again, some 40 times, police now claimed. It's not that big a deal, she went on. Read your Bible. It's there in your Bible. Jay wasn't sure he'd heard right. It's in my Bible? Yes, the Bible states that it's the role of women to be brutalized by men. That's women's lot in life, Jay. These women that got up on the witness stand, they're exaggerating. They're making a big deal out of nothing. Rape isn't nothing, Jay insisted. Her voice became shrill again. Oh, you hypocrite. Do your friends know what a hypocrite you are? Maybe I should tell a few of them. There were many perspectives shared here that do not reconcile with the one recently provided by Mr. Bevan Maxey. These perspectives paint a portrait of a woman who dominated every aspect of her son's life, ruled over her husband, and behaved in an abusive manner to her son and her son's wife. She hectored and badgered even those who showed loyalty to the Coe family in her attempts to regain control over Fred when he broke away for brief periods of time and demanded that they perjure themselves in court on behalf of his defense. And when all of that failed, she moved forward in an attempt to hire a hit on prosecutor Donald Brackett and Judge George Shields after her son's conviction. She had entertained early aspirations of going to California and no doubt felt trapped in what she described as her boring marriage to Gordon Coe. The role of raising 2 children, a residence on the South Hill, material wealth, social clubs, and fashion shows were not stimulating enough for Ruth Coe. She would complain about having to go to football games in Pullman, an activity many people would have enjoyed. Of this theatrical, mentally ill, homicidal, spiteful woman who appeared to have no qualms over soliciting a hit on 2 members of the legal community in Spokane, please ask yourself, what more was she capable of? In presentation number 3, I went into detail over 1, the Coe family's comments on the stand over Fred improving his girlfriend's dress habits, 2, references to the shabby dress of characters found in Ruth Coe's favorite novel, Gone with the Wind, 3, Ruth Coe's speech habits, specifically her phrases I shall and I rather, which connect to the Zodiac's choices of phrase, and 4, Ruth Coe's comments about her fictional Southern childhood, such as the plantation life of her childhood, the mammy who never left her side, the quaint darkies, and finally, 5, the crosswalk here between all these observations and the statement from the Zodiac killer's letter postmarked August 4th, 1969, concerning a most likely fictional character, was a Negro, 40 to 45, rather shabbily dressed. And that's a detail in the Zodiac evidence that I feel may provide actual clues as to who the Zodiac was.
Yeah, I mean, it could definitely be referencing that. Hey, Shake, how are you? Shake's joining us. Welcome.
Okay.
So definitely the verbiage is definitely reflective of what was written in the letter. Um, and also, I think that when you're looking at how important that is, it definitely could be reflective of that. Um, so
All right.
what are
So,
your thoughts on that?
well, to me, if this is a fictional character, the person who created it had options, had choices in what sort of person they would create, and this is the individual that they created. And I just think it's important to keep in mind the words of Sharon Hagen. The offenders, when they commit their crimes, can't help but leave clues about who they are, where they've been, what their prior relationships look like, what their future relationships are likely to look like, and how they're going to behave when we encounter them. There are plenty more anecdotes that could be shared about Ruth Coe, but it's time to return the focus back to her son. It's easy to see that he was under a lot of pressure from a young age, and this can help provide insight into his behavior in the context of other relationships. Of particular interest is the relationships he maintained with his closest friends. Frederick Coe used others to gratify his personal needs and achieve his personal goals, the same way his mother used him. It's my opinion that he did so in order to establish some aspect of control in his life to cope with the chaotic, abusive relationship he had with his mother. One has to wonder how he felt once his small high school network of friends he could manipulate was scattered after graduation, and he proceeded to become a dropout at 2 universities by mid-1967. Where was his locus of control at this time? Surely there was a negative psychological impact, as his failures and the intense pressure put upon him by his mother collided with his unrealized but most important goals to become as rich and as famous and as handsome and as healthy as he could possibly become. Getting out of Spokane in 1968 to attend radio school in San Francisco no doubt provided a welcome escape from his mother, as well as opening up new possibilities for this grandiose, braggadocious, plagiarizing, theatrical son of a city editor as he bathed in the counterculture of the times in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco. In the next presentation on Frederick Harlan Coe, I will cover his obsession with fame and being highlighted in the media. This will be a short installment on Frederick Coe, albeit a very important one when considering Frederick Coe as an important person of interest in the context of the Zodiac Killer series, where the perpetrator threatened to kill if his demands for front page publication in the newspapers were not met.
Great, thank you, Kim. That was a really great presentation. Shake, did you have any questions for us before we get ready to wrap up? I know you joined in right there at the end. You might probably need an opportunity to read or listen to the beginning part of the presentation. But while we wait to see if Shake has any questions, or if anybody else has any questions, I just want to let you know that we are having a panel discussion tomorrow. Part of the Chronicle, we're having Shake and as well as Druzer and myself, and we have a couple other people hopefully who are going to join us tomorrow. We're going to be having a discussion on whether the Zodiac Killer crimes are random or whether they were planned. And I want to also thank you all for joining us today. Please make sure that you like, subscribe, and share so that you can be notified when the next installment of Kim's presentation on Coe will be coming out, as well as the next availability of the Chronicle. We hope to see you tomorrow. Let's see. It looks like Shake says there is some interesting discussion we have had with Kim for the family infrastructure. Yeah, it was very helpful to go over this. It really kind of makes you understand the impact that the relationship that he had with his mother. And Shake also is talking about how Cowles Hartnell is the angle at Investigate. Also, some further discussion about Crane Crane Realty. Oh, that's interesting. Maybe that's going to be something that she's going to discuss in a future episode. There's actually something else that I wanted to talk with you about too, and we can follow up with that later on some things that I found too that might actually tie in with Co. I'm not sure how, but if you do have any questions for Kim, please make sure we're getting ready to wrap up. You won't be able to talk and chat, but you could make a comment, and we will either address it in the comment section or in a future episode. So thank you, Kim. We appreciate you giving the presentation, and thank you all for joining us today. We will see you either tomorrow or on our next episode. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Have a good day.